Hi everybody, welcome to the Maintenance Manager. My name's Dave Rauch, CEO of ProTech Building Services, and today I'm pleased to announce that we're meeting with Stephen Shuey
Yep, that's me.
out here in Rancho Mirage in the
California.
desert in Palm Springs, California.
Yeah.
And Steve has a very varied past, started in the military, and you're going to tell us all about this. Started in the military, and then went on into engineering, building engineering at the only high rise in Palm Desert here, I believe.
Rancho Mirage.
And from there, he went into community management. And in community management, he's been extremely active. Of course, you're semi-retired now.
Yeah.
And but as a community manager, he earned his CCAM through California Associated Community Managers, and he earned his PCAM through CAI. So Steve is also on the national faculty of CAI. So Steve is got so many great stories. We're going to jump right in and ask Steve to really kind of maybe start by telling us a little bit about that journey from the military to maintenance to community management.
Okay. Well, I will preface that with the fact that I started out as a young kid as a locksmith.
Okay.
And then I went into small appliance repair. And then I went into the military, learned air conditioning, refrigeration, learned building maintenance, facility maintenance, and then came out of the military and went to a 20-story hotel in the North Hollywood area where I did general building maintenance for them. And then an opportunity came to come to the desert because a little known community, I can mention the name, Desert Island, had two 7-story buildings with these major air conditioning systems, and they had no one who understood how to maintain them. And so a company in Los Angeles hired me, the company who built that system hired me to come in and be the maintenance guy. The community had an ex-Marine colonel that ran the community, and he said, I need a guy to do the entire maintenance of this facility. So we built maintenance systems, and that was my lifeline. I was about 17 years as a maintenance engineer. And then they finally, the developer I was working for said, we want to get out of here. We're done developing here, but they want to keep you on. And so they asked me if I would, stay on as their general manager. And that's where I grew to. I was there as GM for over 15 years. And then I realized I wanted to be more impactful to other communities. I had the knowledge. I'd gone through all the training with CAI to get my PCAM. I'd gone through the training with the CACM to get my CCAM. And I thought, I really do want to expand this so people understand how this whole management thing works. And I went to work for a small family-owned company known as Personalized Property Management here in the desert. And they manage right now about 150 communities. And although I've retired from them, I still do consulting work for it.
So you were a maintenance engineer on a high-rise and then this other property for about 17, 18 years. But then how many years were you a community association manager?
I actually, the actual technical time was 15 years.
Okay, 15 years, great. And I know now too that you're active in CAI still.
Yep.
I saw you in Dallas, right?
You saw me in Dallas.
That's right.
I've been to every national convention since, I don't know, 1985 or 1990, somewhere in
Awesome.
there. Yeah.
Awesome. So you're very involved trying to share that knowledge. So let's, there's a lot we want to talk about today, but first let's talk about boards of directors. And in your opinion, what are the common mistakes that boards make when managing their communities? We had talked about the condo model being a little bit flawed because it's not one person taking care of the assets of community, it's a group. Unlike commercial property, unlike industrial property, unlike educational and government property. So why don't you tell us your perspective of that challenge?
That challenge is tough because these board members that get elected to their board of directors, they're just average people. Some of them are housewives that haven't worked in business at all. Some are in business where they do financial management and they understand the financing of things, but few of them have ever had the understanding of maintenance, of what it takes to maintain a place. And their biggest focus is keep our costs down, our costs down. That's their big deal. And well, except you've got to pay for the maintenance you want to get. And so it took a long time. And in my case, I was talking to the board of directors on a regular basis about the maintenance I performed, and they would just, their eyes would glaze over. They didn't understand it at all.
Not very sexy.
No. So it was, yeah, the board members, their biggest issue is they're more concerned about keeping costs down than they are keeping the maintenance up, not recognizing that how do you get the property values to increase over time? You maintain the property.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think a board of directors is so focused on keeping costs down versus trying to determine how to increase the value of the property itself? Is it because they're not trained, they're not business people? What do you think some of those main reasons are?
I've been trying to answer that question for the last 40 years. I don't know why that is, except that I think what we don't do well is train the board members. So CAI put some great classes together trying to help board members understand things. You're doing a great job with videos like this to help them understand what's going on, but they're stuck on the fact that, I'm sorry, I've got to keep my costs down. And okay, but let me help you see the long-term effects of your keeping your costs down. As you and I both know, if we take a maintenance issue that it just got discovered today and decide not to deal with it till next year, the cost of dealing with it next year is a whole lot more expensive than it would have been when we first discovered it. And they don't get it.
Exactly. And that's the key concept, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's mine too.
And that is that no matter what type of problem you see with a building or common area, if you don't fix it and address it immediately, it's going to be more expensive tomorrow. Because the materials are more expensive, the labor's more expensive, you got inflation, you got cost of living. So all those things. And the other bigger example, which you and I discussed briefly, was Champlain Towers. Now, when that building first noticed they had a problem with spalling concrete due to rusted rebar, I think the fix initially was $3 million. Then Morabito, the report came in, and I think it was $9 million. And then 3 years later, it was 18 or 16 million. So these expenses just grow exponentially. I think that's the key lesson that we need to try to get to boards of directors who are not business people.
Yeah. They need to understand. I mean, I remember when we first built our reserve study before reserve studies were commonplace at Desert Island.
Now you're going back.
1978. And I had this ex-Marine colonel was my boss at the time. I was the maintenance engineer, and he was trying to have me help him develop what are the costs going to be to replace all these components as they wear out, because reserve studies are right around the corner. And so we built our own. I built spreadsheets to track all this stuff. And I went out, he had me go out to plumbers and people and say, what's the life expectancy of this copper pipe? And they all said, we don't know. It's too new. How about this cast iron pipe? We don't know. It's too new. They didn't have the understanding of what the life expectancy is going to be. So year after year, we put building life as the life expectancy because no one knew the answers. And then after I'd left that community, about 10 years after I'd left, the leaks started developing. And so I was there 33 years, and the leaks were starting to get pretty bad at probably close to year 40 or something like that. And they ended up having to replace all the piping inside this 7-story building in the walls and what have you. And when you think about that, these are people's homes in a high-end community. You start opening up their walls, the cost of getting that done is expensive, and they were not prepared for it because we scheduled it as building life. And so we didn't have a budget developed.
Absolutely. And that's the beauty of what was recently done by CAI to update the reserve studies to incorporate maintenance, because historically you put that building life in there, nobody really knows, but essentially it's the replacement value of the component, and reserve analysts know that there's probably not going to be much, if any, maintenance done. But if you do the maintenance, now that CAI is recommending in the updates, you can actually reduce the amount of reserves monthly, annually going to replace that component because it's going to last longer. The component.
And there's another part to that too, though, I think is important, and this fits the guys who are stuck on budgets. That is that take the copper pipe in the building, for example. There really is no maintenance to that copper pipe. It's inside the wall. You can't get to it. but to know that it does have a life and someday it's going to wear out. So you start building a fund so that when the time comes, the money is sitting there in the bucket,
Exactly.
ready to go.
And that's another great thing about the new reserve study updates is they do now have in the reserve studies those hidden components as well as structure.
Yep.
So every common area component is now in a reserve study. Thank goodness.
Yes. Well, and when you think about things like Champlain Towers, where they had that rusting happening to rebar and that sort of thing, nobody was looking at it.
Yeah.
And I think every community, especially multi-story buildings, they need to have somebody on site with an eye for looking at the things that might be hidden.
Yep, exactly. As a matter of fact, I interviewed Scott Stewart, the manager there, and he told me how the two maintenance technicians he had couldn't even speak English. So he had a challenge just talking with these guys, but they weren't doing anything proactive on that building. They weren't reporting the condition. They weren't logging maintenance like you were doing.
Well, and that was one thing when I first got involved in condominium management, my bosses didn't understand tracking maintenance and the value of that. And I was a young kid who wanted to learn computers, and this was before IBM put theirs on the market. And I actually built a computer and built a database system. I got to meet a guy from IBM who understood how to build database systems, and he helped me learn how to write the programming. And I tracked every piece of maintenance so that years later I could go back in and say, how many times have we worked on this kind of project?
Right.
And it would tell me, here's the history of all the maintenance you've done. And that was so helpful to determine now I can schedule things and develop a maintenance plan. Okay, this thing wears out or has a problem this far down the line. This is how we have to maintain it from now on. When you maintain things correctly, the complaints go down, board members are happy, management doesn't have to work as hard. Yes, they have the work they have to do, but it's scheduled.
And the costs go down. But again, that's the challenge of explaining to a board of directors, especially the treasurer, who have these budgets, the financials, and they don't understand that if they spend money today to prevent these items, that they're going to save a ton of money.
Yeah, because the cost of repair is always more expensive than the cost of maintenance. It just is that way.
Well, we've beat up on the board members, so let's say, and you obviously were years ahead of your time with tracking and maintenance and things like that, that maintenance manuals and reserve studies.
But it came out of the fact that I worked in a 20-story hotel before I got into condominium management, and the hotel industry did have maintenance programs. So I learned to begin with that. Then I went into the Air Force where they had maintenance programs. So maintenance became a part of my lifestyle.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
So, well, let's move from board of directors to the community managers. And what do you think is the most significant mistake managers make in communicating to boards these things that we're discussing, the importance of maintenance, the importance of maintaining, protecting, enhancing the common areas, and how to educate the boards on this importance?
I think our managers don't have that quality I like to refer to as bold and vulnerable.
Bold and vulnerable.
They need to be able to tell the board members, this is what it takes. And yet the board member says, I don't want that, so they back off.
Right.
Well, come on. You're the expert in the room. You're the manager. You understand what needs to be done. These board members don't necessarily come from a maintenance background, so they need to be told what has to happen.
Right.
And you as the manager have to recognize you can't back off just because they're pressuring you. And the managers will say, yeah, but I don't want to lose my job.
Yeah.
I got news for you. This thing falls apart, you'll lose your job anyway.
and that could also be due to the fact that you had a grounding in maintenance.
Yes.
You understood how important maintenance was, not just in saving money, but safety. And a lot of managers, are younger and they don't understand the importance of maintenance like you did.
Well, and
what's the saying again? Bold and what?
Bold and vulnerable.
Bold and vulnerable.
Yeah. I need to be bold with you, and I'm going to be a little bit vulnerable as I tell you my story because you might fight back on me.
Yeah.
And so I'm being vulnerable at the same time. And when you think about managers, when I came into it from the maintenance perspective, I had that maintenance background. Most managers come from an administrative background or an accounting background.
Right.
And so they don't really know the maintenance side of it. I was just very blessed and fortunate that I happened to come from the maintenance side. And then the general manager I worked under was insistent on having me learn how to budget and learn the CCNRs and all the documentation and attend board meetings and find out how minutes are created. I didn't want to do any of that. And I'll tell a quick story. He says, "Would you like to be a manager one day?" I said, "What? And put up with what you put up with? No way in the world." But he honed me into recognizing the value of that. And I got the respect from the board members because we maintained the community very nicely.
But still, young managers having to deal with a group of 3, 5, 7 board members who seem to be in a position of control is not an easy thing. So my heart goes out to the young managers, and I just hope that they embrace the bold and vulnerable. I like that.
I got to tell you, if the managers today would develop their relationships with their board members, share their expertise. Don't be afraid to say, "Look, I'm knowledgeable in this area," so the board member can take use of that. Then when it comes time to help the board recognize the value of the maintenance that's necessary, the board members already got that relationship built where they know this guy's my expert. I need to listen to him.
Right. And the other challenge with being a community association manager is they're wearing so many hats. They're trying to help with the financials and budgeting and the CPA. They're trying to help with landscaping and landscape issues, maintenance and maintenance issues, legal, which is a big deal. And for some reason, managers are always listening to the attorneys. And I think that's in large measure due to the fact that there's so many new laws here in California, at least every year, that they have to pay attention to what the attorneys are saying. Any other advice, you were a manager, any other advice you could give to managers on helping them explain to boards the importance of maintenance tracking?
What's worked best for me is have regular board orientations. When a new board member comes on, get the entire board together and share with the entire board, this is how it works. And include in that the need for maintenance and the value of that being, if you don't maintain it today, you'll be paying tons to get it repaired tomorrow. And they don't recognize that. You take the roof, for example. The roof's a good example because we all have roofs on our buildings. And you take twice a year, you go up and inspect the roof and make minor repairs. It costs next to nothing. But you wait until now, oh my goodness, we've got leaks happening here and there. You're paying for the leaks, you're paying for the repairs. The cost has tripled or quadrupled.
And it's funny how leaks always happen at night on the weekends. True, isn't it?
Yeah, it is true.
True. And actually, the roof example of preventive maintenance is the one I like the best. Because if you, just to expand on what you were saying there on the roofs, if you look at the lifespan of a roof, it's 30 years, maybe 40 years. So let's say it's 30 years, and in 30 years, you have to save up for 30 years to replace that roof. And it's, let's just call it a $10 million roof. If you can get an extra 5 years of life by doing that preventive maintenance, you're saving about $400,000 a year cost on that roof. So that's a great example of the roofing maintenance.
And I got to tell you, you use some lightweight numbers. I think you could increase the life a lot more than you suggested. Because when you do the regular maintenance on things, you really do extend the life of things. And yes, there's an ongoing maintenance cost, that's true. But to pay for the ongoing maintenance is far less expensive than when the problem is created, when the repair is needed and the damage is caused.
And again, it's the lack of the maintenance or structural knowledge that really hurts. Let's give you an example. Here in the desert, in Palm Desert, Palm Springs, the sun is
its biggest enemy
out all the time. And if you lose a few roof tiles, that sun's beating down on that roof tile. And what happens is the roofing felt, the tar paper,
the underlayment there,
underlayment there that is actually the waterproof membrane to the building below, that becomes brittle, it loses its emulsification, and it tears. And that's the problem. And that could happen if you're looking at 20 buildings, condominium buildings, and you've got, just say, 5 or 6 of those where the tiles or the asphalt shingles or the clay or concrete tiles that come off.
Kept the rain off, it's gone.
And if you don't get that right away, one summer, 1 year out here in Palm Springs, that is going to be a leak.
You know, the other thing that I hear about a lot is the paint on the outside of the building.
Yeah.
You know, the building looks nice to the people who live there. It looks nice. What's the problem? You don't realize that now that paint that used to shed the water is porous and
Yeah.
water's getting through it.
Yep.
You've got to do those painting projects
Exactly.
on the scheduled period because the manufacturers of that paint, they knew this paint's going to last this long before it starts becoming porous and
Right.
that's leaking.
But if you're doing regular maintenance inspections, this is another thing
Yeah.
boards need to know. You don't have to repaint the whole place at one time.
Right.
You can repaint those areas that have been subjected to the worst of the weather and the sun, because it's the rain and the sun that really wears that paint away. And once that paint's gone, you know, that wet wood is just perfect termite food.
It sure is.
Wet termites love wet wood.
Yeah.
And of course, there's wood rot. And in California here, we have the new deck law, which you know, we're going to talk about in a minute. But that's why that law is so important, is because all this wood deteriorates. Just like in a forest, when the trees fall down, that tree is there for a few years and then it's just gone. And it's the same thing with wood that isn't protected by stain or paint or some protecting.
And you know, managers aren't expected to be experts in all these areas.
Exactly.
I think they need to develop a relationship with a quality maintenance company or a maintenance person that helps them see these problems that they're going to be up against.
Exactly. You and I had talked a minute ago before we started here about the developer and the importance of the developer in the initiation of communities, new communities. Your observation was the same as mine, and that is that the developer often puts a budget together, an initial operating budget that is insufficient to properly maintain the community. And they do that obviously because they don't want the initial HOA dues to be high.
Right.
They want it as low as possible to be able to sell to a broader market of home buyers.
I'll tell you something, another secret that developers told me that it's very little known, but we had a situation in the community I managed where leaks were developing in decks, open decks that were on top of living spaces. And I asked the developer's consultant there, I said, so why don't you have these things built correctly to begin with to solve these leaks? This thing shouldn't be leaking in a building this new. And he says, you got to get the economics of this. He says, our deal is we're spending thousands and thousands of dollars in interest just to build these buildings. And when we get the first few homeowners in and get a homeowners association developed, they'll build a maintenance program and they'll get to be able to take care of it. And we don't have to worry about it. So your idea is build it cheap as you possibly can. And okay, so there's some maintenance issues here. The incoming group will take care of it. Only we don't teach the incoming group how to take care of it.
Yeah. And you know, that was a problem I identified 30 years ago. Started writing maintenance manuals, started educating developers about this, but ultimately in talking to a number of owners of big home building companies, Don Horton, some other folks, you know, I learned that, you know what the most important thing is? Exactly what you're saying. It's sales.
Yeah.
They have to sell those units to pay back the loans to the banks.
Well, I didn't realize
and sales trumps everything. Maintenance can wait.
In the community I manage, when that guy told me, he says, we spend $30,000 a day in interest. Holy smokes, $30,000 a day. And no wonder you're concerned about getting sales out there and getting them sold.
Yeah.
It's expensive to build these buildings.
Let's say a homeowner association is a relatively new association. It's got this unrealistic low budget. There's very little money is budgeted for proper maintenance and inspections. How do you recommend that a manager or management company educate the board of directors that they have a problem on their hands?
I think the first thing is most associations, they relate the management company that's working for the developer as part of the development team. Whether they are or they aren't, they think they are. They think they're in league with the developer, so they don't want to have the same management guy. They want to get a new management company in here. Big mistake. Your management company, unless they tell you they're moving on with the developer and they're going to leave anyway, you need them because they have the knowledge of what's going on. And then they can help you recognize, look, guys, here's how the developer worked. Here's how you need to work. And you need to teach these boards right in the beginning. Set up a program and pay the bill for it. The fact is that to run a board member orientation for a couple of hours per association every year to get them to recognize this is what your job is, this is what you need to look for, these are the kind of values you got to put into it. That has to happen. And it's not happening near like it should. There are a few companies that actually do it. The one I worked for a while, Personalized Property Management, they actually scheduled me to meet with new boards every month or so. I'm meeting new boards and teaching them this kind of stuff.
Well, that's great.
But that 2 hours of time, when you get to get those board members, all 5 of them or 7 of them in the room together, and I insist, by the way, that I want all the board members there. Thankfully, today with video training, you can get a couple of them on Zoom.
Right,
But
right.
we insist they be there so that everybody hears the same story, so you don't have somebody arguing their point having not heard the educational value of it. And they get it when you talk to them, and they get to talk to each other about how they can build their plan to make their community better. One of the teachings I like to give is the fact that, look, your job is not to worry about the pets and the pool people and
Parking.
those things. You really need to worry about the overall policy making so that you can enhance the values of the assets that you have here,
Right.
and teach them that kind of stuff. And then they can put their team together through committees or however they do it, and they can rely on management. And one thing boards love to do is micromanage the manager. Which one's a professional here? Come on.
Yeah.
Trust your managers to know what's going on, and then let the manager help you develop the plans you need. And it's not going to be free, but it has to happen. Now, the company I work for, they give their board orientations out on a regular basis, once a year for any community who wants it, for free, because they know that if we get them working on the right track, our cost of doing business is less.
Sure.
Just like the preventative maintenance on a maintenance plan.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Do you include the developer in those board orientations?
I have when there's been a developer involved.
Gotcha.
We typically get involved after the developer has left, so they don't get involved as much. But when there is a developer involved, you bet I want them in the meeting.
Do you teach at those board orientations the value of not always selecting the cheapest bid, and how to deal with contractors, how to put in maintenance programs in place, landscape maintenance program, building maintenance program, plumbing maintenance programs?
Yeah, that's a big thing to go over, because in the old days, back in the 70s, documents used to say you must select the least expensive bid you get.
They did say
They
that?
actually said that in the CCNRs. It was shocking. And
Jeez.
that got changed out pretty quick in the mid to late 70s. The attorneys caught on that wasn't working. My teaching is very clear. You need to analyze what the offering is from the company who's providing the service, and then based on what you see and hear, what their cost is, and then negotiate your deal. And it may not be the cheapest deal, but you know you're getting the quality you need and the services you want to get the job done. And the board members, unfortunately, don't have the knowledge to know what he told us that makes sense to us. So you rely on your manager, who does know those things, to be able to help you and guide you in choosing the right contractor that's going to get the job done well.
Right, because managers and boards have to deal with a lot of contractors, a lot of different, I mean, there's probably, in your experience, 20, 30 contractors on a regular basis at a community?
I could say 20 or 30. For me, it's been smaller communities. So, but you have your landscape contractor, your pool contractor, you have a painting contractor, a road contractor, maybe a sweeping contractor, different contractors like that. That's true. And you have the handyman kind of guy who comes in and does miscellaneous repairs.
Maintenance.
Because most of the smaller communities don't have on-site people. The on-site communities, like the high-rise buildings, for example, they have on-site people, and so they can schedule their work out. The thing where they make the mistake is they'll take the on-site guy who's scheduled to take care of all this preventative maintenance. Now they've got a repair that has to get done over here. Let's forget this maintenance. Let's go get this repair done. And now this is falling apart. They've got to recognize it all has to get done.
And the maintenance personnel or contractor has to speak up.
Yes.
You know, they have to let the association manager know that, hey, this is not in part of the scope of work. And happy to help, but this is not.
That's where I say be bold and be vulnerable.
Now, you're well aware of the new California deck law. Interesting law, first one in the nation like that, to mandate inspections, which are due by the
And
end
these
of
are
next year.
deck inspections for elevated decks that are hanging out
Yeah.
like cantilevered out there.
Well, I
Yep.
think it's decks and walkways and
Yep.
anything they call it exterior elevated elements. So
Yeah.
it's decks, balconies, walkways, anything that's over 6 feet built with
And we
wood.
know that happened
So,
because somebody died. I mean,
yeah,
accidents happened
it,
where because of a lack of maintenance, the balcony
yeah,
collapsed.
I believe it happened directly because of the Berkeley balcony collapse. It killed
Yeah.
7 students there
Yeah.
in Northern California. But I do think the law is interesting and good, and it's turning up a lot of issues.
Hmm.
But the problem I have with it is it is limited. You're only mandating the inspection of wooden elevated elements. You're not
Okay.
inspecting the desiltation pond. You're not inspecting all of the fascia that might now need to be painted. You're not inspecting the roof that, needs regular annual maintenance, and if a bad storm comes along, could have, damages that need to be repaired. So it makes it seem to a board like these are, because they're very expensive, these are the only inspections that need to be done. That's not the case.
And we should
There's,
treat that as an example of the maintenance need to be done because
yes, as an
they built the
example.
law because of the tragedy that occurred. I
Right.
get that. But they don't see is that the value of that building, when you go to sell your home that you owned in this
Mhm.
in this community, and all of a sudden the buyer comes in and sees how poorly it was maintained, he doesn't want to pay for it.
Mhm.
And the people who live there need to recognize if you want to keep the values up, you've got to maintain things. That includes that painting,
Mhm.
the fascias and those kind of things.
Right.
And paying attention to what goes on.
Right.
And I've had a number of board members, actually, and homeowners tell me, why am I paying money into this roof? I won't be here when it fails.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you've got to pay for the ongoing use you've had of it while you lived there. That's the idea behind community common interest developments where we pay the common fees together.
And that reminds me, that's a great example of why reserves are so critical.
Yes.
How unfair is it if a homeowner buys in the beginning of the community year one and doesn't pay anything into the reserves for replacing that roof, and he leaves at year 20, right?
And you're
He's
21,
gone.
a new roof
Somebody
is on.
comes in, a young couple or somebody comes in at year 20, and they buy that unit, and then 2 years later they end up having to pay a special assessment to replace that roof.
And the reason California put in the reserve mandate was because of that very example you're giving. The new buyers, they are very unhappy when they suddenly get hit with a special assessment that really should have been built into the budgeting process.
Right.
The reserve studies do that very well.
And what I've seen time and again is when you put a special assessment out, that board gets recalled. They get fired.
Yeah.
And you get a new board in there, and it takes a half year to educate them as to why they need to replace the roof, and you're back to square one.
Yeah.
Big problem.
It is a problem.
Other than that, there's other inspections that still need to be done that I worry that aren't going to be done because of the big focus on the decks. Do you see any other issues or challenges or problems with the deck law?
I haven't investigated the deck law that deeply because I didn't have any communities I was working at where I needed to. But part of the flaw is that they don't actually go into teaching I want to call it the internal workings of it. The fact is that the structural part that's in trouble is down inside the building somewhere.
Right.
You can't even see it from the outside. And one has to recognize what caused that damage back inside the building was happening out here 10 years ago or 5 years ago, or whatever. And so it's an ongoing maintenance thing. And so as boards, when they have a maintenance team available, they should have those inspections done on a regular basis so you can catch it early on. Otherwise, you miss it and the damage is done where you can't even see it. Even though you do an inspection out here, you're not seeing the real damage.
Absolutely. And going back to your history is you're inspecting, you're looking around all the time, and you're going to see decks that aren't properly shedding water.
Right.
You're going to see areas where the water is coming down where a gutter should be. It's coming down the side of that stucco wall and entering the building. destroying through wood rot the cantilevered beams that holding up that deck. So your history, that would have caught those situations. But
Yes.
now, some of these condo communities, you don't have that vigilance.
But even though I've caught it, how do I transmit that information in a valuable manner to the board of directors who has to spend the money?
Right.
And get them
Right.
to understand that I've caught this, but man, you guys have to recognize
Right.
we've got a fund for this.
Mhm.
You know, the big one coming up now, and you'll love this, is the wrought iron railing that's on the edge of the balcony.
Right.
And the base of that railing goes into a concrete base and rust develops around it. So what do? Every 5 years, we schedule painting the railing.
Yeah.
And they paint right over all the rust. And then
Yep.
Mrs. Guest comes in and she leans on the railing a little bit too hard and the railing collapses and falls off. I mean,
Right.
there again, if you had a regular inspection of things before you get the painting done, look the building over.
Exactly.
And see what needs to be done. And I don't think we can expect managers to even recognize the damage that they're looking at.
Right.
They need a qualified person who understands these components.
Yeah.
The roof or the balcony railing or the concrete deck,
Yeah.
or whatever it is. And they should call in the experts. And the civil code in California actually says that boards need to, as part of their fiduciary duty, rely on the expertise of the experts. Don't try and do it all yourself.
Yep. Yep. And those balcony railings, that metal is interesting because oftentimes what happens is the concrete cures it creates like a little ponded area and the water just sits there. And so really the solution is you have to build it up with Quikrete or some kind of substance to shed the water away from there. But yeah, that's a big problem.
But
balcony
you have to
failure.
notice it. You have to be aware that it's there.
Hence,
and the inspections cause that to happen.
The inspections.
And it has to be somebody with an eye for that.
Yep.
So a manager who's busy working on budgets and financials and coordination with board members who doesn't have a maintenance mindset may not even see it when it happens. Call in your maintenance expert to look things over from a maintenance perspective.
Exactly. We had talked about the broken condo business model, and that's the one where an HOA board of directors is reluctant to raise monthly assessments on their neighbors or even themselves.
Yeah.
And that was basically what happened at Champlain Tower South, that ended up killing 98 people. And I just, for the life of me, can't figure out the solution to that model. In other words, in an institutional building, a hospital, a commercial building, an office building, an apartment building, there's one person in charge to make sure that the building's being maintained.
And typically
because they have a lot to lose if they don't maintain it well.
Yep.
But here you've got 5 people that are constantly changing, no one person in charge, and nobody educated in the importance of maintenance. So how do we address this busted condo model?
You know what? I'm still trying to figure that one out. The fact is, I think that when we can educate them, now what's happening in the real estate world, as we know, is that the buyers are becoming more educated. They're looking at a budget and say a reserve study, and they're examining, do you guys have enough money to take care of the maintenance of this? The savvy buyer is starting to get there, but we're just at the tip of the iceberg.
Right.
So there's a lot more they have to learn. Our incoming board members, they're so concerned. And remember, when you look at the submission they make to get elected to the board, what's the main statement they make? I'll save you money. That's what you see in all of them. They want to cut expenses, and they don't realize that, no. What you ought to be bragging about is, I'm going to make sure the maintenance is taken care of to increase the values of our community.
Right.
That's what they ought to be working on. And if we can get that turned around, and I don't know how to make it happen yet, but I think education is the key. The associations like CAI is built where it has a homeowner component, a manager component, and a service provider component, all part of the organization.
Exactly.
Whereas the state organization is built around managers. And that's nice. It works very well to get the managers properly educated. But in CAI, they've got the opportunity to share stories between each other and teach those homeowner board members what they need to understand.
Right. And completely agree. And that's why, I want to highlight the CAI created this.
Great book.
which is, basically explains to board of directors how to put together a maintenance plan, how to put together a maintenance program, reserve studies, and how reserve studies interact with maintenance planning and programming. and then also how to contracting.
As I recall, you were involved in the writing of this, weren't you?
Yeah, but yes, education is the key, but the challenge is that these boards are changing all the time. And so, boy, it's just a huge challenge.
So why don't we make it a mandate? And I recommended this in one of the articles I wrote for the Common Ground magazine one time. This is mandated reading before you get on the board.
Yeah, I don't know if you can do that, but
Probably not.
but you know, mandating deck inspections, exterior elevated element inspections is, I think, the wave of the future. States are going to more and more get involved and tell boards of directors, you must do this, you must do this, you must do
But
this.
you know that's happening.
If the education doesn't happen, and these tragedies continue to occur.
And that's where managers need to recognize part of your job is to educate those board members. And maybe part of that education is, please don't micromanage me, I'm your expert.
Right.
But if they get that education to the board members, then they'll get it. But who's going to educate them? The only ones there is the manager, and help maybe encouraging them to join things like CAI, but even then, teaching them about what's happening in their community from your expert perspective.
Excellent. Let me touch on one final subject, Steve, and that is a possible solution. And I think a possible solution to this conundrum could be coming from the insurance industry.
Yeah.
Because like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, who are putting, stringent requirements on conventional loans in HOAs, the insurance industry is really in this, and it's a very hard market right now. They're facing the same challenges. They don't want to insure communities that aren't being properly maintained. And so, do you think there's any chance that the insurance industry could step in here and get involved and say, for instance, a community that's well maintained could get a discount on their insurance premiums? Is that a viable option?
You know, the president of Personalized Property Management got with a personal friend of his who was in the insurance executive, and they were trying to work something like that out. The problem is, how do you convince the insurance company that the maintenance is actually happening? And that requires tracking.
Right.
So as we go through this, communities need to recognize that tracking your maintenance is important. Take the one, for example, of the machinery insurance that you get. So you got a boiler and machinery insurance program so that if the machinery breaks down unexpectedly, insurance can help cover the cost of replacement of it. What is the first thing they look at? Show me your documentation that you changed the oil in the mechanical equipment like you should have. Show me your documentation that you did these maintenance things so that you did your part to maintain it, and the breakdown was actually accidental as opposed to because of lack of planned maintenance. And so I think communities need to recognize that now that we're becoming aware, and yes, we want the insurance companies to help us out by lowering their premiums if we do the proper thing. Then start tracking every detail of your maintenance so that you have a record that you keep it as a permanent record, by the way.
That's great. And looking for patterns that you see could save even more money.
I had a case one time where I was tracking the light bulb replacements in a building, and after looking at it a year later, found out this zone of this building's having multiple light bulb replacements, where this side of the building's not. Why is that? We had a circuitry problem. We repaired the circuitry problem. Now the light bulbs last longer. Amazing stuff. But having the tracking to see the trending was very important to catching that situation.
Well, one thing is for sure, and that is the next 5-10 years in our industry is going to be very interesting. I think Champlain Towers and those deaths were a wake-up call to the industry, and
well, the deck in California was too, but it didn't last very long. It was a single incident as far as people were concerned. They didn't realize this is a big deal.
We've tracking deck collapses all over the place. Fortunately, it doesn't kill people, but it should be a interesting next 5 years, 10 years in this industry. And boy, I sure have enjoyed talking with you today, Steve. And I appreciate all you've done for our industry. And I want to just thank you for your time today.
Thank you. I got to tell you, what you guys are doing, building maintenance programs, is key to making community associations function properly.
Thank you for that, Steve. Appreciate it. And thank you, everybody. Please stay safe.